Well, happy Mother's Day. Thanks. And welcome, Oconomowoc family. Good to have you guys. And I have a special thank you to my sister and her family and my brother-in-law's parents that came and surprised me today as well. So, yeah. No pressure, that's right. So I've had several ask me if I'm excited to speak. Let's just say it takes me 2 years to build up the courage to do this again. So I'm nervous, but I am excited for this message I believe he has laid on my heart. It's actually been burning in my spirit for the last couple of months, and excited that I finally get to share it with all of my friends. In case you don't know our family, I'll just start off. We have 2 sons. Carson is 20, and Bryson is 14. And Bryson's actually with us in second service today. So we have a kind of a deal in our family. If they're used in a sermon and it's not embarrassing, they get $1. If it is embarrassing, they ask for $5. So I'm hoping with Mother's Day that I will get a free pass, because I thought it'd be fun to start off with a little humor at my boys' expense, of course. It is Mother's Day. So we'll start with Carson. At age 3.5, we were walking into like a Sherwin-Williams paint store, and I asked him to hold my hand. He proceeded to point up to a sign on the wall, and he said, "Mom, that says no hand holding allowed." At age 6, he got in trouble and said he was sorry, just to earn back the privilege that he lost. I said, "Sorry doesn't cut it, Carson." He said, "Mom, in the Bible, if you say you're sorry, it does cut it." And Bryson, at age 4.5, we were driving along and saw 2 teenage girls walking their dog. He said, "Man, Mom, those girls are beautiful." I said, "What about the dog?" He said, "The dog's cute, but man, those girls are beautiful." And he was only 4. Also at age 4.5, I'm sorry, buddy. Also at age 4.5, he was coloring in his Disney coloring book and was coloring Alice in Wonderland. I said, "Her hair's yellow like mine." Bryson said, "No, Mom, yours is gray." And lastly, my personal favorite, at age 6 on Easter Sunday, my mom noticed that Jesus' foot was broken in Bryson's resurrection playset. He said, "I did that on purpose when I was 3. I didn't know Jesus back then." So today is the day that we honor our moms. But this message, I believe, is for everyone, not just if you're a mom, not just if you're female. I think if you're male or a son, daughter, anybody, I think this message can be an encouragement to you and to help build your faith. Because I believe where you are in life right now is on purpose and for a purpose. You're in preparation for a miracle that's coming. Earlier this year, as part of our SOAP Bible reading plan, we read through Exodus. It was also in conjunction with the Average Mose series, looking at the life of Moses. If you weren't here, I highly encourage you to go back and listen to this series. I personally love Bible character series. Now, I know Todd can't do all series on Bible characters, but I personally get so much out of these and learn how to relate to these characters in the Bible. And Moses was no exception. I've read through Exodus many, many times, but this year, there were parts of it that just jumped out at me and spoke that had never spoken to me before. And Marie Newby in our bridge group said the same thing. There were just parts in Exodus this year that we just got more out of. And so kind of today, I'm going to share some of what I had learned while reading Exodus. Well, also while reading Exodus, I was reading Lisa Turker's new book, It's Not Supposed to Be This Way. I highly, highly recommend it. And I'll be sharing a few of her quotes in my message. So let me briefly set the stage from Exodus 13. Pharaoh has finally consented to let the Israelites go. They're finally free of their many years of bondage and slavery. And Moses tells them to remember this day forever. Please don't miss that part, because I'm going to kind of keep referring to the remembering. What is a day that you will remember forever? For me, I will forever remember October 7, 1998, and December 19th, 2004, the days our boys were born. I will forever remember June 9th, 1990, the day of our wedding. And I will forever remember September 4th, 2011, our first Sunday as your pastor. But back to our story, not only is this a day to remember forever, but they are told they must celebrate this event each year when the Lord fulfills his promise he swore to them and their ancestors by bringing them into their promised land. It was coming. Can you imagine what they're feeling? After years of oppression, abuse, and slavery, they're finally free and headed for the promised land. I'm sure they were super excited, but also maybe they had a little apprehension. Slavery had been their identity and all that they had ever known. Maybe they even had some doubts Pharaoh would change his mind. He had said many times he was going to let them go, and then he wouldn't. Would he change his mind again? So due to their excitement and the possibility Pharaoh may change his mind, I'm sure they wanted to get to this promised land as quickly as possible. Now, some of you in here may like to take the slow and scenic routes on trips, but our family wants to get there, wherever there is, as quickly as possible. My husband has often told you how fast he likes to drive. And we especially do not enjoy detours. So now we come to Exodus 13, verses 17 and 18. And these are the specific verses that spoke to me a couple of months ago. When Pharaoh finally let the people go, God did not lead them along the main road that runs through the Philistine territory, even though that was the shortest route to the promised land. God said if the people are faced with a battle, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led them in a roundabout way through the wilderness and toward the Red Sea. There were two ways from Egypt to Canaan, their promised land. One was a shortcut, probably about 4 or 5 days' journey, and the other was a long cut, much further, crooked, winding, dry, difficult, and it went through the wilderness. And that was the way that God chose to lead his people there. We often have a goal, we have a destination, someplace we want to get to, something we want to become or achieve, and maybe even it's God that's directing us that way. But we can't understand why it's taking so long. Can you relate? Well, I believe there were several reasons why God led them through the wilderness and toward the Red Sea. Number one, he didn't want them getting scared right from the beginning and run back to Egypt, the place of their bondage. God desired true, permanent freedom for his people. Number two, if they went the short way, they would have encountered the Philistines, and they weren't yet fit for war. Their spirits were broken with slavery, and it would not have been easy to immediately go into battle. Number three, he knew experiencing the difficulties of the wilderness would prepare them for what they would face down the road. Number four, I believe he did it to develop their faith. We want comfort, we want predictability, safety, and peace, but God may see we will never grow in our faith or obedience unless we go through a wilderness. Charles Swindoll said, quote, God puts us in the wilderness to test and to stretch us and to develop us into people of faith. Let's face it, our spiritual roots grow deep only when the winds around us are strong. Take away the tests, and we become spiritual wimps. But bring on the wilderness winds, and it's remarkable how we'll grow as our roots dig firmly into faith, end quote. If we have no need to draw upon his strength, we can become complacent and even distant from God. And number five, they learn dependency on him. So let me ask, have you ever questioned the direction that God seems to be taking you? Proverbs 16:9 says we can make our plans, but it's the Lord who determines our steps. Please know, you don't have to know the plan to trust. There is a purpose. So then the Israelites, they come to the Red Sea. Remember from verse 18, God led them in a roundabout way through the wilderness toward the Red Sea. This was part of his plan. It plainly says that God led them. So let's skip on to Exodus chapter 14, verses 10 through 12. As Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, "Why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? We said, 'Leave us alone. Let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness.'" So basically, they were saying we would rather be in safety as slaves than to be free men in danger. Remember earlier, Moses told them to remember forever the day of their release because he knew there were going to be times of doubt and confusion. How quickly they forgot what God had just done for them and all the miracles that led to their release. How quickly they also forgot they were instructed to celebrate each year their exodus after they got to the promised land. The promised land was promised. It was coming. But their current situation looked hopeless, and they forgot to remember. The people of Israel, they come to this place at God's direction. Their predicament is not an accident. It's not a miscalculation. It's not a wrong turn. It is God's plan. There was no denying that, but it didn't make sense. On one side, there was rugged rocks. The other side was impassable. It was a mountain. In front of them is this great Red Sea. Behind them is Pharaoh and the army, and they are approaching fast. On the surface, it appears they're trapped. Why didn't God lead them the shortest, easiest, and quickest route? Why would he lead us out here just to let us die? Well, we know because we have the Bible, we can read ahead. But they didn't know that the greatest miracle, one of the greatest miracles of all time, was getting ready to take place. They quickly became disillusioned and questioned God because they felt hopeless. Instead of remembering his promise and experiencing peace that he's got this, they panicked. Instead of trust, they were in turmoil. I can relate. When I've been faced with a Red Sea moment, my immediate reaction too often is anxiety and not trust. My first thoughts haven't been to remember his faithfulness. How about you? Let me challenge you. What if we change our thinking that where we are is on purpose and for a purpose, even though right now it doesn't make sense in the present? So what are some possible Red Sea moments you have faced or currently in the midst of? The other evening, Todd and I were discussing you. We often do that. And our love and affection for you guys. We're so grateful that God led us here. Some of your stories we don't know, but some of them we do. And we know that right now it's hard to see his purpose because it just doesn't make sense in the present. It's hard to believe because of what you see. So maybe you or a loved one got a bad diagnosis from the doctor. Maybe your boss said he was downsizing. Maybe your son or daughter is a prodigal and has not yet returned home. Maybe you've struggled with infertility and days like today are especially hard. Maybe your bills are piling up but money's running out. Maybe you've prayed for a miracle but God seems silent. I recently heard that even if God seems silent, he's not still. There's a purpose for your process, but no, it's not permanent. As with the Israelites, God in his sovereignty knows that we need Red Sea moments to learn he's going to fight for us. He's going to fight these battles. We just need to learn to trust and wait. I love how Moses responds in Exodus 14, 13, and 14. But Moses told the people, "Don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm." In the midst of their Red Sea moment, they go to Moses and cry out to him, venting their frustrations. Moses responds in a way they could never have expected. With the enemy approaching, the walls are closing in, Moses simply says, "Stand still." When closed in all sides, the only place they had to look was up. Remember, Moses didn't know the end of the story. Moses didn't know how God was going to rescue them, but he had the confidence and trust that he would. A faith in God helps us to know that what we see isn't all that there is. So let me ask, what if the lowest points of your life are actually gateways to the very best parts that you would never want to do without? We don't have to know the plan to trust there's a purpose. So Moses tells them, and I believe is speaking to us today, number one, do not fear. Our natural response when in these kind of situations is we're afraid. But fear is when we can't see God through our circumstances. Faith is when we see our circumstances but through God. I love how Isaiah 43 verses 1 through 5 gives us a glimpse of God redeeming his people. God held them. God helped them, and God delivered them. And I believe he still does this for his people today. I like to personalize scriptures and put my name in them. I encourage you to do the same. But specifically for this one, in place of Israel, "O Michelle, the one who formed you says, 'Do not be afraid, for I have ransomed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you go through deep waters, I will be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you're not going to drown. When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you. For I am the Lord, your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. You are honored, and I love you. Do not be afraid, for I am with you." Lisa Turkhurst says, quote, "When his timing seems questionable, his lack of intervention seems hurtful, and his promises seem doubtful, I get afraid. I get confused. I want to assume that my definition of best is God's definition of best, and that my definition of good should be God's definition of good." End quote. Next, he tells them, "Stand still." Well, our natural response is we want to run. We want to get out of the situation. But waiting on the Lord is when we quietly and calmly trust him until he provides clear direction. It's the opposite of panic. It's different than trying to fix things or make things happen. I love Psalm 27, verse 14. "Here's what I've learned through it all. Don't give up. Don't be impatient. Be entwined as one with the Lord. Be brave and courageous and never lose hope. Yes, keep on waiting, for he will never disappoint you." And third, Moses tells them to watch. Watch God work. Our natural response is we want to fight. But if we want what he's promised, we have to trust his process. Lisa also says, quote, "To trust God is to trust his timing. To trust God is to trust his way. God loves me too much to answer my prayers at any other time than the right time, and in any other way than the right way," end quote. And lastly, Moses tells them, "The Lord will fight for you, so stay calm." Our natural response is we panic. But no, if the Lord is to get the glory, he's got to do the fighting. Charles Swindoll says, quote, "When I panic, I run. When I run, I lose. When I lose, God waits. When I wait, he fights. When he fights, he wins. And when he wins, then I learn," end quote. Stephen Furtick said, "Whatever is surrounding you, know that God is surrounding it." And a familiar passage, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take." This means we rely on him. We let God take the lead and yield the steering wheel of our lives. And note the verse says to do this with all of our hearts, not half-heartedly, not reluctantly, and not with reservations. We recognize God is in charge, and he's the one leading us. He's painting a picture of your life from a higher vantage point. And what a beautiful way to live. trusting God He has a purpose and not relying on what we see or what we understand. If we have, get this, a misunderstanding of God, we will have a wrong understanding of what we're going through. But when we can see His purpose is good, we can also trust His process is good. So imagine with me that we decided to make a cake. After going to the store, we've set out all the ingredients. We have our flour, we have our butter, our sugar, our vanilla, the eggs, baking powder, and then maybe a pinch of salt. I typically just use Betty Crocker to open it up, but imagine with me we're making a homemade cake. But then we felt maybe a little too tired to mix it all together. So instead we thought we'll just take the cake one ingredient at a time. The thing is, sometimes we don't like some of the individual ingredients, so we decided we're going to leave them out. The flour's too dry, leave it out. The sugar, the butter, the vanilla, they're good, so let's leave those in. The eggs, they're just gross when raw, definitely leaving those out. So how would our cake turn out? If we left out the things which taste bad, it would turn out awful. We are so quick to judge the quality of our lives and the reliability of God based on individual events rather than the eventual good that God is working on putting together for us. Just like the master baker has reasons for the flour and eggs in right measure, Jesus, our master and perfecter of our faith, will do the same with our dry and hard times. Yes, we may have to go through some chaos in the mixing and some heat in the baking, but soon our lives will be full of hope, grace, peace, and comfort to others. Romans 8:28, we are convinced that every detail of our lives is continually woven together to fit into God's perfect plan of bringing good into our lives. We are His lovers who have been called to fulfill His design purpose. Lisa Turker says, quote, my hope isn't tied to my expectations finally being met in my way and in my timing. No. My hope isn't tied to whether or not a circumstance or another person changes. My hope is tied to the unchanging promise of God. I hope for the good I know God will ultimately bring from this, whether the good turns out to be or match my desires or not, end quote. No, we trust a God who allows hurt, but we also trust a God who can use that hurt for our good. Lisa goes on to say, quote, we know God is good. We don't know the details of God's good plan, but we can make His goodness the starting place to renew our perspective. As I get ready to close, let's go back to Exodus. Notice, it doesn't say the Israelites killed a single man. It doesn't say they even defended themselves. It doesn't even say that they fought. No, they simply waited. They walked through the Red Sea on the dry ground, and then they turned and watched God work on their behalf. Period. Likewise, we need to wait, we need to walk, and then watch God work. Exodus 17:14 says that after the victory, the Lord instructed Moses, write this down on a scroll as a permanent reminder. Again, another remember. And read it aloud to Joshua. I found this interesting that the Lord specifically instructed Moses to read it aloud to Joshua, because God knew Joshua was going to need to remember because he would struggle with his courage in the days to come. I have highlighted in my Bible each time Joshua is told to be strong and courageous. In Joshua chapter 1 alone, it's 4 verses that he is told this. So when we are in the midst of a battle, when we're at a Red Sea moment, it's easy to become consumed with fear and quickly forget God's faithfulness. God also knew that one day I would need to remember times of his faithfulness to build my courage and faith. After reading this verse in Exodus, earlier this year, I started a section in my notebook, and just at the top I wrote, "Great is his faithfulness." And then I started writing down times in my life when at the time caused great anxiety and worry, that now being on the other side, I see how God brought it all to good. And I started writing out those things because I didn't want to forget. And I also want to be able to tell our boys. Lamentations 3:21 through 23 says, "Yet I still dare to hope when I remember this. The faithful love of the Lord never ends. His mercies, they never cease. Great is his faithfulness. And Deuteronomy 4:9 says, be careful never to forget what you yourself have seen. Do not let these memories escape from your mind as long as you live. And be sure to pass them on to your children and your grandchildren. Remembering builds our faith. Remembering strengthens our courage. Remembering reminds us that we can trust God because he is faithful. Be encouraged, friends. Fear not. Stand still and see what God is going to do. The story he's writing for you is so much better than any story you could write for yourself. We don't have to know the plan to trust. There is a purpose. So I would like to end with a song that will be played via video that has spoken deeply to me over the last several months. It's simply entitled Remembrance by Hillsong. I could take you to the place where I was standing when I first heard it. We were at James River Church in Springfield, Missouri last August. We were only a couple of hours of saying see you later to Carson as he embarked on his first year of Bible college. This song touched me so deeply, especially the bridge. Tears flowed freely and wouldn't stop as we sang, you've been so, so good to me.